Hengist here from House of Hengist Comics, and welcome back to the channel. Today, part 3 of our Stalingrad series, The Last Stand. This is the battle at the hospital. It's all part of Operation Uranus and Stalingrad in around November and December of '42. A horrific confrontation with over 1 million dead. We'll look at the situation report here. This is the battle plan. General Dumitrescu's forces are in and around Ostfront. That's the focus of our little attack, and we'll be doing Kalak shortly. Ultimately, the situation is desperate, hopeless. Just to recap from the last game, which took place, Steiner stepped in, knocked out T-34 single-handed. His platoon, although pictured here from the Taman Peninsula, are younger, although the earlier characters are still in play. Steiner had a number of confrontations with the new commander Konstantin. If you read the earlier report, you'll see just what they endured. It was pretty damn horrific, to say the least. Obviously the march got bad for them. They held for 12 turns on the main battle against a Russian infantry assault. Russian Cossacks picked up their trail but didn't manage to pursue. Steiner's men managed to collect winter clothing, although the Romanians have none. Conditions were just abhorrent, and they continued to get worse. Obviously the situation is very, very bad at General Headquarters. But before we start, I'm going to take us back to the hospital and a little bit of video so you can have a look. The forces here, under a very inspired commander, have basically held. They've held with a great deal of tenacity, but as one of the players stated, it was just a probe. What we're now about to see is 5 Russian infantry companies hit hard, no preliminary bombardment, straight in. It's going to be brutal and tough, and the Romanians have got to hold, otherwise they're going to be pursued with infantry after them and all the weather decks and the other randoms. It could be an absolute disaster. Their commander, though, is a very wily player, very skillful, and will use every trick in the book, no doubt. Here we see the Wicked Noble's position. He's a bit of a dodgy 2IC in that if he rolls a 1, up to 6 bases can desert. This is trying to reflect some of the problems with the Romanian nobility towards their sort of their soldiers. We're now going to look at the Romanian tactical redeployment. In this phase, they're entitled to remove bases from other infantry stands to try and reman guns and weapons. That's provided they make a skill check on that weapon. Ultimately, basically the Romanian commander Antonescu's got to make a number of tactical decisions through this game. He may have to basically pull out or risk overrun. It's going to be very difficult. But let's now examine what he's done. Antonescu has 2 depleted companies, 1 at half strength. He's got some reserves through Steiner, and effectively he hasn't got a lot of firepower with him. The tanks are still there, but there is a chance they're going to get pulled away to other sectors on the line before they're surrounded by the 2 corps of Soviet tanks that are driving on Kalak. It's all pretty desperate, as we've said. So he starts with 3 engineers. He's allowed to redeploy and re-dig in 3 positions because they've got explosives, so they can re-dig in. He's also got the issues of some really poor low-level troops. One of my favourite moments being when he ordered effectively the OP team to get a rifle and get into the trench. That man actually did a heroic amount of fighting in the game. Ultimately, he's facing a horde of infantry, but basically what he decides to do is reconcentrate the position that he's got against this force, and how he does that is by switching his guns to the other flank, by basically trying to trick the Russians by redeploying all his strength on one sector and basically putting as much firepower into the middle to effectively I suppose bait them into an attack, and then force them to try and buy himself time, thereby switch their attack. And this is ultimately what they did. It was an absolutely cracking game. I can't wait to describe and narrate it. But just looking at the sheer weight that's against him, nearly 680 men effectively about to fall on his 250. But it was all there to be played for, and so let's get into the game. The Soviets, their first turn, the whole horde advances. no fire, nothing occurs. But in the first deck draw, bad news. The Romanians are forced to basically release their Panzer IVs, and they are compelled to withdraw off the table to fight in another sector. However, they open fire with extensive artillery. The ranges are 24, conditions are bad. The Soviets start to take casualties. In fact, a lot of casualties from the artillery fire. Their observers are well far forward and they have them ranged in, so to speak. But the Russians press forward. Artillery isn't going to inconvenience them. They want to be at the enemy. The Romanians look very, very nervous, very apprehensive. They withhold their fire in certain sectors. They stay gone to ground. They go on overwatch. They do whatever is possible. But then the penal forces arrive and they start pushing forwards at the centre. Their mission is to clear the minefields, using themselves to do it, and rush ahead. They come under sustained fire and in one round lose 40 men, basically shot down and gunned down. The centre is strong. The penal unit continues to press forward, but it's just taking horrendous fire. The Russians are taking fire all along the line, mortars, the two artillery guns, and obviously they've managed to get through to headquarters and got some priority fire. But this is intermittent. Then the KVs arrive. The Russian infantry continue to press forwards. Again, more and more casualties being taken. Appalling saves being made. But they're not dissuaded. They continue forward and start making sustained attacks. They're not interested whether they get repelled. They just want to weaken and basically put pressure on all of the line. They attack again and again and again, but they just can't seem to get in. They're taking more and more losses. The penal unit is just wiped out, basically shot down to a man. But they press again with more infantry. At this point, there's about 200 Russian dead. The mortars finally start firing, and the KVs who've arrived are being ordered to basically switch and try and go around the centre and the left, which is extremely concentrated, and start moving to the right where there is a gap in the line. However, all the way along that line, the Russians are thumping in. Eventually, they find a gap, smash through on the very extreme right flank. The Romanians pull back, counter-attack, launch sustained fire at them. Conditions are down to 12 inches now, very, very poor. It's minus 20 and dropping. The SMG platoon moves up to support the KVs, and at last, basically, the Germans are starting to be brought into play and moved out of their positions as the KVs rumble forward. What's left of the Romanians starts falling back on this extreme left flank or the Russian right flank, but then out of the blue suddenly launch a counter-attack and launch back into the Soviets, thereby overrunning effectively the last vestiges of one company and trying to break through onto the guns. This was done deliberately because effectively they knew that they would probably draw them off. We're in about turn 10 at this stage, and effectively the Russians suddenly get fixated by an easy kill and try and basically move towards the Romanians that have led this counter-attack by the wicked noble. He hadn't rolled too well and lost about 8 to 12 men who had deserted and surrendered, but in this particular battle he fought well. The KVs, diverted from their assault, go smashing into the trench line, drive off the Romanians, who then basically recover from being suppressed or pinned and manage to counter-attack. What then follows are a series of more attacks by the Russians, but it's just too late. They've left it far too long. Switching the attacks has basically given the Romanians enough time. The casualties have been frightful on the Russian side. They must have lost in excess of 400 men to predominantly artillery fire, which they just couldn't seem to save from. Ultimately, the Romanians managed to withdraw, taking a lot of their equipment, having sustained over 30% casualties. But the Russians, although they lost 2 to 3 platoons, were happy with the day's progress, because frankly, this was just the first wave, and they had effectively secured the position. But this wasn't about securing the position. This was about the Romanians surviving, and they did do just that, and made a very, very successful retreat through the snow with weather actually improving. They were hit by artillery and hit by basically an airstrike. But the biggest irony of it all was they came to a fork in the roads and the commander said, I quote, "I think we'll head towards Stalingrad. That looks like the best place for us." Well, with that, and so well played throughout the whole thing by the Romanians who stayed in character, who fought with such tenacity. It's been brilliant up to this point, and we've also enjoyed it. It's been really tough and challenging on both sides of the forces to try and recreate this horrendous conflict. But in the meantime, can I ask you to continue to support us? If you enjoy our work, please get engaged with us. Please try and send us ideas or whatever you want, because this is very much about a community comic and about all of us sort of working, especially those who are very historical within the community. So I'm wishing you again once more a happy 2017 and our very, very best wishes as it gets colder, harsher and tougher for all of us here at House of Hengist Comics. Bye for now.